as well as my mic. And I have a missing chair on stage. Yeah. Thank you. Any of these on? Is mine on? Is this one on? Pardon? This one on? Pardon? Mine? I've been using this one because this one is off. Yeah? Speak. This one? This one's on. This one's on. All right. I need roving because I'm not standing here. The speaker's on. They're using that one. So is this on? Thank you. Take it off. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we kick off with our official proceedings, I'm just going to double check, as I did in the last session. Are you all here for the port-led discussion? All right, so everybody's in the right room. Thank you for your patience with us, especially from the prior panels that have run over time, but we will do our best to make sure we catch up and allow you to move on to the third stream that is still ongoing as part of this afternoon. If you were here for our earlier session, we started this conversation looking at the role of air travel and our aerotropolis infrastructure in South Africa and how it contributes to economic activity as well as development. But as we continue the discussion now, we are looking at another pivotal point of entry as well as an engine part of industrialization in South Africa, but also the African continent as a whole, which ultimately also drives not just growth, but also trade competitiveness, and that is our ports. The oceans, ladies and gentlemen, the ocean economy is one that, since the beginning of trade, all the world over has made sure that goods and services as well as people have been able to mobilize themselves to many parts of the world, those known and unknown. And today, our ports, as well as the various ocean economy fronts that we have around the world, continue to play a pivotal role in being channels still of trade, but also people, of technology, particularly if you look at how the definition of infrastructure and asset infrastructure, as it were, is growing. And many of you also know the impact that when those systems around those channels don't work, how, of course, it comes back to hit our pocket as the citizen of a country. Many of you, experienced that as most recently as the Strait of Hormuz being closed. And whilst that was beneficial, I guess, to Africa's ports in particular, because of the diversions that are not planned and of that critical crisis type of instance, are not necessarily good money for a country or a port, because there's then implications and consequences related to that, and ultimately some form of either business continuity or recovery that must happen, but also the passing on of the costs of diversions and plans must be made to someone, and that's ultimately members of society, and then we have to begin the debate of whether that is for public good. So as part of today's conversation, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taking a further look, an incisive, practical look at some of the challenges, some of the growth indicators, and as well as some of the priorities that those of you who are involved in whether it is trade, but also in the business of the ports in our oceans, are currently faced with, are currently look at changing and innovating upon, and some of the big questions around oceans and nature in particular right now that have already been raised as part of some of our panels relates to security. We've spoken about water to security in one, and food security and other, and physical risk security. But I think when we specifically look at oceans at the moment, we're also looking at climate resilience and security as well, and what type of investment planning is made there. We're looking at regulation as well, and how reform in that particular space, just around from everything from tariffs to customs, are running. And I hope that this conversation is one then that opens up our minds in terms of what are the main trends and what are the main priorities we all need to follow, particularly as we develop our 3, 5, and 10-year plans around what needs to happen in the port economy. But perhaps most importantly, how it is that we can also partner, because next to you right now is somebody you've perhaps not met, somebody that you may need to work with, somebody you may need to talk to, and the knowledge economy in this room is as rich as that of the ocean. To those of you who are not here for the previous session, my name is Lynette Nduli. It's a pleasure to be your moderator, and I'll be inviting my speakers and my guests up, but to offer us some opening remarks, because as many of you will have noted as part of this particular session, we are really focusing on cities and how cities are impacted by large-scale infrastructure such as ports and airports and that type of bulk infrastructure. And so we are led in these conversations today by our mayors and executive mayors from around the country, as well as from around the continent. So today I'd like to welcome to the stage, just to give us some opening remarks, Mr. Roger, the Honorable Roger Mbasa Ndine, and I hope, sir, I've pronounced that correctly. He, ladies and gentlemen, is the executive mayor of the city of Douala. So those of you who have been to Cameroon and you're familiar with that city, this is the man in charge in Douala, and he's here today, ladies and gentlemen, just to share a little bit of the insights and the impact of the port of Douala and its expansion, as well in terms of how then they are able to trade, facilitate movement from that port in and around Africa, and of course some of their priorities looking forward. Immediately after him, I will invite our next mayor to offer some opening remarks before then inviting the rest of my guests to the stage for us to have a conversation. Thank you. Please give him a very warm round of applause.
Thank you. My name is Roger Mbasa Ndine. I'm the city mayor of Douala. I'm also a member of the executive board of Douala Port Authorities. And before being mayor, I was permanent secretary at the Ministry of Economy, Planning and Regional Development in Cameroon. I'm used to express myself better in French, so please give me, don't be very hard with my English speaking. Douala is the main city in Cameroon. Douala has about 4.5 million inhabitants. It is the main port. Cameroon has 3 ports. And Douala is the main port, which cover about 95% of the trade volume of Cameroon. But Douala is not exactly a seaport. Douala is a port it's about 50 kilometers from Atlantic Ocean. So there is a channel linking Douala to the ocean, a channel of about 50 kilometers. And the city is also serving neighboring countries like Chad and Central African Republic, and sometimes Sudan. The road between Douala and N'Djamena is about 1,000 kilometers long. That means that the competitiveness of the port of Douala not only depends on the quality of the infrastructure of the ports, but also the quality of the link of the roads between Douala and Bangui or N'Djamena. Douala is facing a large increase in volumes of external trade, and both national and regional trade. And in order to handle this trade, this increase in trade, we have tried to build a development plan with short-term, medium-term, and long-term objectives. Short-term is modernizing the existing facilities. On the both sides of the river is named Vuri, the Buri rivers. And we have started to do that for about 10 years now. And this has led to increase the volume of about 15% of the volume of the ports. The medium-term investment plan is to build new industrial zone, economic zone, on the other river which around the city of Douala. The river is called Dibamba. We are building this industrial zone with a partner in private partnership with some investor of ASEAN. And at long term, the main investment will be to build a new deep sea port ahead of the existing facilities. That means at about 35 kilometers from the existing facilities now. And we have already planned to start the works of this new deep sea port in 10-50 years. So that is how I can explain or present to you what is Douala. And that means that the topic discussion of today are very interesting for a city like Douala. The port is, of course, the main economic place in the city and in the country. budget income of a country depends deeply from the port activities. 60 to 17% of the Cameroon budget come from the external trade and from the port. But the challenge is now to modernize this infrastructure, to modernize also the roads and the train linked to the country and the neighboring countries, and to build also facilities, because when you have a road of 1,000 kilometers, it is quite sure that you will have a lot of problems on the roads, and people coming from Chad and Central Africa always complain that's not easy to drive from Douala to N'Djamena or to Bangui because of many controls, too many controls on the roads, too many other problems they are facing. That's one of the main challenges. The second one is, of course, to try to build a good relationship between the port and the city. And I should say it's not easy. The port of Douala is more than 100 years old, and it takes a large part of the city. So that we have to plan the way we build access of people to water, because with all the river bank is now port facilities, and this is another problem. It is also very important for us to try to attract more investment or more investors. This is why the port is extending the industrial zone in the port itself, and to build new industrial zone outside the ports. And this is also another challenge and that we are facing today. Of course, the port is where the custom office is situated. And the relationship between port and custom is not always easy. We have had for 2 to 3 months a deep crisis between the port and the Ministry of Finance, the custom. The question was to know who has to control the goods that are coming from, that can be imported. The port wants to control these goods, and the Ministry of Finance, the custom says no, we have to do that. It was a large crisis, but it is not the last one, I'm sure. Another challenge is to find a way in the modernization of the port to connect the digital development of the port and the digital development of the custom and of the city. We have to build a link between all these development, these facilitation systems. And of course, one of the last things I want to say in these introductory remarks is about the way to tackle the climate change. Because with the building of a port, the mangrove is disappearing. We have a lot of problems and floods today, the city, because this natural barrier is disappearing. This is another challenge. We are trying to do that hand in hand with the port and with the government in order to preserve the quality of life of people in the city of Douala. That is the main topics I want to present here. I'm sure that when we are coming to a discussion, there will be a lot of questions about one or other issues, and I'm ready to try to give you answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please may I very kindly ask you to take your seat again at the front. Thank you. I do appreciate that. Thank you for giving us an introduction to Douala, and hopefully everybody's locating it on the map. But as they do that, all the way across the other side of the continent, on the exact end opposite south end of it, is Nelson Mandela Bay. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can very warmly welcome to the stage Councillor Babalwa Lobishe, who is the Executive Mayor of the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan Bay in the Eastern Cape, to also give us some insights in terms of how that region is using its port status and advantages to drive economic growth and prosperity in the region. I know, Mayor, Port Elizabeth, East London, Ngquga, sometimes it all gets mixed into a trio of activity, but the three are in fact very different uses stated for different purposes. So I certainly hope you will help us differentiate that and also start looking at specifically what your priorities are around developing the ocean economy in that area.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Julie. Let me greet all the esteemed guests in the room without missing anyone, with the intention of not wanting to miss anyone. Let me say all protocol is observed. Program Director, I'm not sure, Moderator, I followed your instructions, but let me follow the new ones now, which which relates to how we see the advantage of having these ports. In fact, as Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality, we're not simply here to theorize the discussion, but we are living geographically with two ports, and with that advantage of having two ports and our industrial base and our economic future is then located under that agenda. And also we pride ourselves for also having a cruise liner economy attached to the same ports, which drives our economy much higher with a benefit of about 129 million that is derived from the cruise liners that dock in our city, which are 49 in a financial year for the past 2 months, which did not come by accident. We have jointly lobbied with Transnet on that. And we also come here to state the advantages that we have, which we have Port of Ngquga, which is a deep water port, and an important gateway to international and regional markets with a capacity of 13.7 million tons, while Ngquga SIZ provides a platform for manufacturing benefits and also exports-orientated investment. And located also in our city is the Port of Port Elizabeth with a capacity of 8.6 million tons, which is also in Nelson Mandela. And this gives Nelson Mandela Bay a unique opportunity to move beyond being a place where goods pass through and become a place of value creation. And modernizing the port infrastructure is quite critical for us as the city, and also with the growing economies in Africa and regional trade expansion, our ports should be ready to receive those volumes of cargo. And modernizing and building bigger terminals is part of our priority for faster and reliable delivery of logistics requirements. And also the efficient cargo handling, deeper integration with rail and road networks. So as Nelson Mandela, we welcome the new reforms which were made recently by the minister in terms of the program that she is running, where these national reforms are increasingly opening opportunities for greater private sector participation in rail and port infrastructure operations. So it's going to really modernize our infrastructure, and it's going to help us to expedite much better in terms of how we deliver on the infrastructural need, and also keep up with the expansion on the growth of access to Africa. We also, under the theme of connecting ports to rail and roads in industrial corridors, the future of Africa trade cannot be built around ports alone. We believe in that as the city, and hence we are saying there's a need for integration of industrial corridors, which will combine the ports, rail, roads, logistical centers, industrial zones, factories, and markets. And this is particularly important for our city, and our port infrastructure must connect efficiently with KUGA, SIZ, the automotive manufacturing ecosystem, which is our backbone of the economy currently, and Nelson Mandela Bay Logistics Park, which is the brainchild of the city, managed by the SIZ, and the wider Eastern Cape economy. We are also believing that the logistics corridor must also connect us to the rest of South Africa, the SADC region, and ultimate African continent trade area. Using these ports to attract manufacturing and investment, we are of the view that as Nelson Mandela, in as much as we have a proud history of the automotive sector, and the future competitiveness depends on the strength of these ports, because we cannot transport these cars in and out of or to other ports without the efficiency or running effectively these particular ports. And we are saying KUGA SZ has demonstrated the potential of combining the industrial land, infrastructure, logistics, port access, and to attract investment. The SEZ hosts automotive, it hosts other manufacturing activities, whilst the recent development includes the preparation for the Stellantis manufacturing facility. So we are of the view that in the Nelson Mandela, we can stand proudly that there is much integration with our SEZ and what is happening in the port. And yes, there is a lot that we still need to do in terms of making sure that the automotive component manufacturers are still based in the port, and also tooling and equipment manufacturers, your metal and mineral manufacturers or processors, the agro-processing, chemical, advanced manufacturing should also be looked at, and green hydrogen and related industries. And we are of the view that the SEZ has that capacity of hosting all of these kind of manufacturing industries. The environment is conducive. It's a matter of us receiving investors and offering the package for the future. So the relevance of us collaborating and also backing this investment, we are of the view that if we leverage on the infrastructure that has been built over years, the combination of with the combination of the three spheres of government, because it has been successes of the three spheres of government joining forces to make sure that the SEZ exists, and also it is also supported fiscally for it to be able to have these investments and for job creation purposes, because it will be pointless for us to build all of these infrastructural needs and job creation is not achieved. Program Director, the special economic zones are engines of port-led development, and the Kuha SEZ provides the important model for what port industrialization can look like. And we are of the view that we need to temper strongly on and hold a meeting, a strategic meeting, which is outstanding between us and Kuruleni. As the Minister of Roads has made a pronouncement that the corridor between us, the rail corridor, ought to be realized so that more of freight transfers and other rail-related businesses can happen. So there is an outstanding engagement, which we are of the view that it's not the only thing that can be achieved under the special economic zones, but we are of the view that connection of the SEZ with universities, with surrounding communities, with a transport network, because currently there is no formidable participation between the SEZ and us as the city and PRASA, which should be talking on how the network, the transport network, we are reimagining it. The city is growing, but we have not achieved that. In terms of the digital customs and trade facilities, there's still a lot that needs to happen in this space. But all I can tell you is that we have achieved a lot in terms of managing the relations between us and customs, doing a seamless exercise on managing the flow of economy. But we are of the view that for as long as it has not translated to SMMEs benefiting and understanding logistics digitally, we would have failed as the local state. And our ambition is to connect Africa market, support smart port and seamless logistics corridor. And lastly, in terms of the climate resilience, our primary mandate as a local state is to provide services and to our people. And if we're talking of climate change, it means our city has got to be agile on the changing conditions of the weather. So drainage system, cleanliness and availability of it in all the spots that are identified as prone to flooding has got to be done. And as well, the road connections, bridges and roads is what is going to help us to be more resilient on the climate change. There is currently a climate change commission at presidency that we are participating in, and also with the local business chamber, which is advancing the changing times and how we become a resilient city to all of those. So we are quite confident that the future is in Nelson Mandela, and the future on integration of the ports, rail, and logistical centers, industrial zones, factories, and market is what is going to help us achieve better job creation and better economies for the future of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Executive Mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, Councillor Lobisha. She will be here as part of the next day and a half's program. So please do feel free to engage her on some of the very interesting propositions, but also the opportunities, I think, that she has pointed out that lie not just in her own bay, but in the three adjoining ones. Now, if I can very kindly call to the stage my panel guests this afternoon, the Honorable Mr. Joa Christophe Mungwambe. He'll tell me if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, is here on behalf of the city of Maputo in Mozambique, where he is the deputy mayor and their councillor for infrastructure and waste management. Welcome, sir. If I can also welcome Mr. Conrad Joseph, who is the Executive for Strategy and Communication at the Freeport Saldanha Bay. Ms. Shamila Subramani, who also joins us this afternoon. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Business Initiative, which is the NBI, as well as Mr. Ndleleni Mkhonta, who is the General Manager for Modernization and Innovation, who is representing Transnet here today. If they can all please come up and join me on stage. Good afternoon, sir. All right. Everybody got a mic? Okay, there we go. Thank you very much to the opening remarks that have been given to us by the mayors who are visiting us today, because they have set the scene for this conversation. I think we can all agree that cities all have ambitions. Cities also all have aspirations, not just for their growth, their development, as well as their market needs, but also it's the growth and ambitions of its people that ultimately hold a city's heart. And so listening to both mayors, and especially the mayor from Nelson Mandela Bay today, one of the key things as well is to start looking at how do you make sure you've also got skills in the markets, and innovation plays a role in making sure that everything we are here to invest and build in is actually something that will continue to generate economic activity and that can be sustained. So today I'm going to then ask our speakers to just give us some of the pointers around in the spaces that they currently have influence in, around how those ambitions have actually turned into practical action. So I'm going to start with the Deputy Mayor of Maputo and welcome him firstly to the Infrastructure Conference. But perhaps most importantly, we've seen the Bay of Maputo and the city of Maputo growing simultaneously. And with it, not just Maputo growing, but other new ports in and around the Mozambican coast, taking on wider, and ambitious projects as well to assist the growth of Maputo, specifically as it grapples not just the ocean economy, but also local economic development and some of the beneficiation around some of its other key sectors. To you, Deputy Mayor, in your practical experience, and particularly because Maputo and Mozambique have actually done it in a fairly short amount of time. There was no 50-year plan, but in a very short amount of time, there's been a major acceleration that has taken competitive advantage of what's happening around you. What for you have been the, the comparable strategic priorities across your layers and levels of government, local government, your provincial, your regional government, but also the different ministries that have resulted in this acceleration that we've seen in simultaneous development in Mozambique and Maputo specifically?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is João. As said, I'm a Councillor for Infrastructure. And it is a pleasure to be here and on this panel for discussion. Related to the question that has been made, one of our strategies as a city and as a country is, of course, human development. Without education and preparing of the people, whatever exists as ideas or opportunities, you cannot implement. So one of the main strategies that we have made and still continues is to invest on human capital. Secondly, if you want to have sustainable development, you have to have a clarity of where you are and where are you or do you want to go. So it's important that all sectors work together in a clear plan where you have clear goals and you have the possibility of analyzing each time where you are and where you are missing and what you have to do to improve as you go. So in basic terms, I would say is those strategies that we have. You have to be clear where you are, where you want to go, and then how you go and you reach that, what you want. So, of course, there are challenges, many challenges, and one of the challenges is in terms of capital investment. So that is one of the reasons why we are here, because we would like to understand and see how we can, through cooperation, make sure that we get the support and the funds that we need to do what we are having as challenges to implement. Because projects are many, but then how you implement those projects. So I hope that these discussions and this opportunity will bring our to us few ways to get engaged with the different institutions and have eventually funds to implement some ideas that we have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that insight and just those two priorities that you've set those targets on. Can I please just pose my next question to Mr. Mkonta? And I think specifically coming from Transnet, whenever in South Africa we speak about corridors, particularly related to trade and the mobility of goods, services, and even people, typically and almost always at the forefront of that conversation is the role of Transnet at the helm of that. Transnet, much like its counterparts around the continent, but also in country, has also seen its fair share of headwinds, various master plans that we have lived through various iterations of, and they are continually being refined. And I think what you've heard, particularly because you might have been here for the first session and second session where we spoke about the Aerotropolis, and now we're speaking about ports, is that without rail and road joining the conversation and converging and integrating into the conversation of how to help support the growth of air and sea, we're going to end up with an imbalanced system that is simply going to remain constrained and therefore ultimately crippled in terms of how we can accelerate economic activity, but also what ultimately spills off as the cost of doing business and moving people around related to that inefficiency. Can you talk us a little bit through some of the strategic work you've been doing at Transnet, particularly in a time and an era where there's been a lot of turnaround talk, various upgrades, just both in the ports, but also on the rail network as a whole, because the rail network Transnet has doesn't just affect us in South Africa, it goes right across the continent. And what that ultimately speaks to in terms of the coordinated activity that we need right now that will restore not only balance to the whole system, but will also reinstate, I think, confidence related to investment and the ability for business to grow. You on? Yeah.
Afternoon to everyone. It's not working. Yeah. Yes, yeah, that's better. Yes, afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Ndleleni Mkhonta. I'm the General Manager for Rail Engineering and the Modernization within Transnet, or the new division which is called TRIM, which is the Transnet Infrastructure Manager. Yes, the key thing basically with the infrastructure manager is we are driving the new rail reform in the country, which deals with basically all along we've been just having only one, let's call it train operator, which is Transnet Freight Rail. So this policy now is trying to open up to other participants in the railway sector or the transportation of freight and so on. So part of the discussion thereof is to say, how do we then enhance the network in terms of the railways, the interconnections, the corridors and so on, such that it will basically take whatever capacity that the various ports will offer. We've got the Port of Saldanha, Cape Town, Richards Bay and so on. So all those ports basically need to consume or accept all the freight that is coming from inland into the coast. So again, the issue of the imbalance is that you don't want a situation where you are bringing in a lot of goods, but they are not being taken care of by the port and then taken off, or the other way around, such that the ports now have got too much capacity and the rail infrastructure is not adequate to bring that on board. So in this regard, one of the key challenges that we face as now the railway network in the country is the maintenance that is involved to bring up these lines into an acceptable level so that you can indeed accommodate other players besides the freight rail division that we currently have as Transnet. So in that space, because we will now be basically separate ultimately as a TRIM or the infrastructure manager, it means we need to welcome other operators. You might have heard recently about 11 other operators that have been brought into this fray. And those operators basically, they will all be wanting to use the same corridors, the same routes and so on. So if those routes and corridors in terms of the rail now, if those routes are not up to scratch in terms of reliability, safety, no derailments and so on, then it means there will be a challenge in terms of consuming the capacity that the various ports would now be putting into the fore. So that is the first priority that we are dealing with as the infrastructure manager or TRIM, in terms of saying, how do we accelerate the maintenance in terms of this so that we allow more capacity, in essence, for these other role players that will be coming. Some of them will be coming in October and all the way up until March in the following year. So that's the type of timeline that we've got to turn around the picture from that perspective.
A short timeline, but a necessary timeline in order to do the necessary catching up and bringing them together. I think, Conroy, let me come to you from Saldanha. And perhaps one of the smaller ports, but a very niche port, much like Ngqura, as was explained to us a little bit earlier in terms of the role that it plays within our economy. While Saldanha is a very specialized port within the Transnet family and where it sits, a fair amount of modernization and a fair amount of innovation takes place at some of the smaller ports that are in niche industries because you're responding to what markets need and how you add value as an operator in those particular spaces. One of the other big things that keeps coming up is the conversation around, ports as engines of growth. Is this growth must not just be like a hallowed ambition that's held by government and sort of the top investor in a market, but it must trickle down to grassroots level and community level across a country like ourselves. And whilst today we focus quite a lot on big cities and the big metros, it's also important to us to realize that around these ports are communities that are there and use these ports as well and they bring not just labor, but these are actual economic hubs. How has Saldanha in particular embraced that as a town where people don't just live there to be, in the labor markets in service to the port, but have added value, in terms of manufacturing, industrialization, and how small businesses, across a very wide value chain, how are they participating and how are you guaranteeing that that sustainable approach is one that is carried through how you work in Saldanha?
Thank you, Lynette. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion. I think, let me start by saying that as Freeport Saldanha, when it comes to the nexus of ports and industrial development, our central argument is that when you have efficient ports, you can really unlock your economy. But it's really only through designing and implementing an integrated port industrial corridor or ecosystem that you can transform that economy. And so what we as Freeport Saldanha consider as measures for success should not only be the amount of tonnage handled at ports or the amount of vessels serviced, but really how are we leveraging port infrastructure to unlock opportunities across manufacturing, value-adding processes, exports, supply development, and skills development, as well as sustainable jobs. Now, to your point and to your question, one of the things that we see coming through, also in the new Sustainable Industrial Development Strategy that was recently launched by the DTIC, is the importance of inclusive development, right? And what we consider a success for us would be an integrated port industrial area where local workers, businesses and communities are able to participate and they've got visible opportunities and pathways to participate, whether it be through procurement, enterprise development, skills development, or just having a sustainable job. And this is very important for all SEZs, not only Freeport Saldanha, because as the mayor pointed out, what use is all of this development if it's in an enclave? So yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Conway, for that, for how you're using that value chain to build inclusivity. Ms. Shamila Subramani, the NBI, the National Business Initiative, and the work that you do around advocacy for that very inclusive growth is been pivotal in terms of making sure necessary conversations and projects and work streams exist between various players who are gathered at this conference and at many others at different points within our economic dispensation in South Africa over the years of your existence. The NBI is also one that always wants to look ahead, but also is always looking at the urgencies of today. And, as we talk about the issues related to upgrades and how inclusive growth also happens, I think it would be remiss of us to miss how it is that, when it comes to ports as engines, how did we regress and how, as we progress, what is the cost of that and what's that ultimately going to mean for the end user, who is business and ultimately the customer themselves? So there's been the knock-on and off effects from certain of the delays and disruptions, but now we're modernizing and we're moving to repair. Can you talk to us about your thoughts around what we need to inculcate into the process of repair and redevelopment at the heartbeat of the change and the transformation that we're currently undergoing in our infrastructure sector, particularly our ports right now? And what business that you represent at the NBI specifically wants to be focused on, because it most benefits the activity that they are currently invested in as end users?
Thank you, Lynette, and good afternoon, everybody. A real pleasure to be here. So, Lynette, on that point, I think there's been... sorry, are we we struggling, or is it just my voice? No, better, thank you. One of the very clear areas in which we can see business focus has been actually through the support of the reform agenda under Operation Vulindlela. So for those from outside of South Africa and who think, what on earth is that? Operation Vulindlela has actually been the reform agenda that has been put out by the government, has been located in terms of a management under PMO in the presidency, and has over the last few years focused on a number of different areas. And what it was basically seeking to do, and I'm giving the overview because I think it's important to locate in the context of how government and business have partnered together to get a sense of how this has worked. So under that agenda, which was primarily a reform agenda, I think there was an acknowledgement that the country was in decline and that we had serious issues concerning infrastructure, which are really the bedrock of the economy. Now, that then found itself located along a few critical areas. The first was the formation of the National Energy Crisis Committee. As many of you would know, South Africa has had serious challenges via energy utility, and that has hampered growth and has had serious impact on our citizens over the last number of years. Aligned to that, the second area was the National Logistics Crisis Committee, which was also set up. And that, of course, and I don't need to tell you much more than what my colleague from Transnet has said, because it really is looking at across the board the different forms of logistics, how they needed to come together. And in fact, in his address in the midterm budget speech, I think it was, I will give you the details now, Minister Enoch Godongwana, our finance minister, in the medium-term budget policy statement in November 2023, stated that rail underperformance was estimated to cost South Africa up to 5% of GDP in 2022. Now, when you're struggling with growth rates that have been sitting under 1% for a long time, when statistics are telling us that we need to keep growth at least 3% just to not lose jobs, and we need to be in the 5% category to start growing the economy, anything that impacts at 5% of GDP is a serious impact. And with losses of around 50 billion rand in the mineral sector alone directly as a consequence of inefficiencies in rail. So the reason I'm bringing that together is because that tells you how the structured program came together. And of course, the third key area, and not the only one, of course, was how to deal with crime and corruption. Which of course means that even if you grow, but you're losing money through crime and corruption, you're actually not doing any good to citizens, and you're effectively still eroding the bedrock of the economy, the capital base, and then therefore the very basis on which you need to grow. So those are the areas in which it came together under the Operation Vulindlela umbrella under government, and then the business-government partnership was formed a few years ago when the government came to business and really said, we want to partner on making this work. That then gave birth to that partnership, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because there were a number of reforms that the government was looking at that business could then directly support in different ways. One of the things that my colleague from Transnet mentioned was talking about the infrastructure manager, which was then under Transnet, one of those reforms was looking at the separation of operations and infrastructure management. And so when you look at those, that then opens the door for competition coming in. And the idea, of course, the notion is that competition can help us to really improve efficiency, see where we can do that. But none of that can be done without the infrastructure management that he said. So those are the areas that have come together. They have been mapping the actual progress over the last number of years in very key ways. Business meets with presidency every 6 to 8 weeks, directly looking at what the indicators of performance have been and where those things can be improved. So they are tracked, there's accountability, and there's a key steering committee that works together with the presidency on that. Then the key things that I want to come to very quickly on a slightly separate but very much related note, and thank you to the Councillor Bishe for really setting the ground. I don't have to say much more. She mentioned a lot around resilience and the need for that infrastructure. So one of the things that the NBI works closely on is the agenda on looking at sustainable development and within that sustainable infrastructure. If you look at what the floods cost Durban a few years ago and the damage to that infrastructure, that starts to tell you that we actually cannot afford not to build in resilience of that infrastructure. Africa as a continent is expected to be anything between 1.5 and 5 degrees higher than the global average in climate change and global warming. that is a serious impact in terms of the infrastructure, the heat resilience, the ability for infrastructure to manage heat resilience on one hand, but of course on the other hand, other climate variability and related things like storm surges and the like, all of which have major impacts for how our infrastructure can withstand that. If you have flooding at the ports, if you have subsidence inland, all of those things coming together seriously erode the ability of the economy. And so the need to build in climate resilience and build that into infrastructure now means that we need to pay careful attention to what the climate modeling is telling us, and the investment that we're making now has to have specifically considered what those variabilities are going to mean for different parts of our continent, because there are actually micro differences in different areas, and it won't be a one-size-fits-all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that insight around resilience and building and designing now for that resilience. Conrad, to you, Saldanha on the coast, certainly one of the bays that has been hit by these major climate incidences that have happened, and they've changed the way in which perhaps you plan and what business continuity means in terms of a port such as your own. Where are you sourcing at this point in time everything from best practice to some of the benchmarks related to just safety in a port, when you start to look at what climate change and the markers of resilience mean to us in that particular space? And what are you seeing in terms of end users, your consumers on the other side? Are they integrating the possibilities of what is happening? Are they taking different insurances? How are they allocating the risk related to these events as they happen around the world, in terms of how they ship and how trade is then impacted and affected by them? And have you seen anything that we should be looking at as something we can replicate across all of our ports as an opportunity to circumvent the negative impacts of not planning and designing climate resilient scheduling, market spaces and ocean spaces for that purpose?
Thank you, Lynette. To be honest with you, at Freeport Saldanha, our interface with when we work with the port, one of the things that we've focused on over the past years is really ensuring that the port is future ready, and working with the port closely in terms of their planning. So ensuring that not only is the port able to handle the cargo of today, but also the industrial flows of the next 20 to 30 years. And so when it comes to climate resilience, this is an important thing to note as well, because as you've noted, and as Ms. Subramuni has noted as well, South Africa, and especially the West Coast, is really sensitive to climate change. A few years ago, we've had a drought, and so even when we work with the port in terms of some of the nascent industries that we're looking to develop at the port of Saldanha related to green hydrogen, which is obviously needs water, we have to be aware of the fact that we're in a high-risk area in terms of drought. So that is one of the things that we've worked on with not only actually the port, but also with the municipality. So for instance, the municipality, stemming from day zero, they held an environmental approval for a desalination plant. And so some of the work that we are now leading with the municipality, with financial, with development financiers, and TNPA is looking to see how can we develop and operate that desalination plant and make sure that it's upscale to meet not only the demands of the green hydrogen developers, but also the municipality should the need arise going forward. So I think that is one of the things that we're looking at as well. Thanks.
So integrating it not just as a crisis management plan, but also making it part of the operations of a wider and integrated plan around water security in the area. Thank you so much, Conrad, for sharing that. And I certainly hope that's something that we take as a nugget from this, because so many of these models that are happening perhaps in isolation and in certain silos and spaces are actually very easily replicable, especially across organizations and institutions that have the same policy and frameworks that govern them. Deputy Mayor Jose, if I can pose a question to you. You've introduced a very interesting dynamic to our conversation today by saying Mozambique invested in education and skills. And that's been perhaps one of the great battles for us as a country, as South Africa, and many other countries. And so what then typically happens is we all import scarce skills and talent, particularly when we want to invest in large-scale and catalytic projects and developments related to infrastructure. And so there's always this push and pull force around the demand for certain types of scarce skills. Has Mozambique then simultaneously, over and above its bulk infrastructure, its port infrastructure, and its general logistics infrastructure, then invested in educational facilities or specialized educational facilities to train up this human capital? Or is the human capital development happening at the scale where there is a project and hands-on artisanal skills or mechanical skills or on-the-job training skills are being developed as part of projects and demands that are being met and targets that are being met through the projects themselves in order to meet the very accelerated pace at which your country is moving through its projects?
Well, investing on human capital is not one single action. You have to do it continuously. So the fact that we have many opportunities and investment happening in Mozambique brings additional challenges. Not only in Maputo itself, but the whole country. It's well known that we have now discoveries of gas in the north,
Yes.
the center as well, and even in the south. So this area is new for us, for Mozambique. And we still have a lot of shortages, for instance, in this type of areas.
Yes.
So the challenge is still there. And I do believe that we will still have this challenge for many, many years to come. And if you think that one single area with these gas then bring additional challenges in terms of other complementary areas, then you can see that this challenge is really, really huge. So, and we are clear that we cannot do this alone. And we consider that we'll have also to have the collaboration and contribution of other countries, I would say that. Even South Africa, why not? Are we thinking on integration?
Yes.
So if we are thinking on integration, why not going to neighboring countries or other countries and bring these knowledge and experience that exist, and also foment and do on-job training. So I think that it is something that you have to go and do continuously. And this morning in one of the first meetings that we had, that even in South Africa, this challenge is still on. Okay? So you never finish this. And if you see, let's say, for instance, now we are thinking on artificial intelligence and so on. You have to rethink on what you do in certain areas,
Yes.
or which are becoming more and more outdated.
Outdated, yes.
So what I would say is that we still have a long way to go, but we have to continue investing on that, so that, and particularly engineering and technical areas, so that we can cope on these opportunities and challenges that we face on our path to development.
Thank you very much for that thought. And I think one of the legs now of infrastructure certainly does need to become education to make all of this asset management sustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a unique opportunity as part of this panel, and a very brief one, to open to the floor if there are any questions to my members of my panel this afternoon before we wrap this session. Are there any questions for the members of the panel while I still have them up here? None. Okay, this is very much. Is that a question? I know that this is very much the graveyard shift on a Monday.
Thank you very much. My name is Joseph. Tsatsiri is my surname. I'm from the Nelson Mandela Metro. My specific question goes to Transnet. I think in our economy currently, we have seen the transportation of manganese by road from Northern Cape to the metro. And obviously, we have seen quite deterioration of the road infrastructure. And ordinarily pre-COVID, it used to be, the rail network that I usually transport manganese. I just want to check, are there any plans to go back to rail, and take, off the trucks off the road? Thanks.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, currently we do transport manganese to the PE side, but it's not enough. And as a result, we actually end up having to transport manganese in other ports as well. Even in Saldanha, we do push manganese there. Also in Richards Bay and a bit in Durban. The issue is the infrastructure in terms of the rail. We need to actually expand it. Part of the program that goes with the rail reform is that now that Transnet infrastructure manager is becoming separate from the operator side, it's becoming sort of like your roads, Sunral, sorry. It's becoming similar to Sunral. So what that means is that we need to invest more in terms of the infrastructure. And some of the funding mechanisms that we are currently embarking on is the infrastructure fund, which basically is trying to add capital into the system to not only do the backlog maintenance, but also to expand. So in particular for the manganese route, there is a big project that we are looking at, which will include basically increasing the capacity, the number of trains that we can run through to PE, and also basically per train to say instead of running 106 wagons, you can run up to as far as about 150 wagons per train, so that you can increase the capacity to push more manganese into the port. Because ultimately the strategy of road to rail is what Transnet actually is driving to say, let us remove the trucks in terms of moving the freight, but not necessarily obviously excluding them from the value chain, but making sure that the longer routes, like for instance to move from your Northern Cape all the way to PE or to Saldanha by trucks, it's not sustainable in terms of the roads. But the shorter distances, say taking the product to the sidings where you can then load it, those links will still be available for trucking businesses and so on to participate, but not the long haul that is involved, because it's also not cost effective for those truck owners to conduct business in that way. The rail is the cheaper option therefrom. Thanks.
I see another hand, but before I get to the hand, can I allow you to respond? Please continue.
Let's take the question.
Okay, let's take the question. You had, okay, no problem. Over to you, sir.
No, thanks. I'm Jameng Wenyam from the presidency. I just wanted to direct my question to Mr. Mkonda from the modernization and innovation perspective. For example, the points that were raised by the mayor from or Port of Douala. So the issues around modernization, are there any at a regional integration perspective where there is that sharing around the modernization of these ports, especially in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area? strengthening those forward and backward linkages. So where, for example, some of the goods that we can get from Cameroon or that region for value addition on our side, but also just broadly for the increase of the trade volumes internally. I know at a certain point Transnet had a focus program around ports collaboration on the African continent. I'm not sure whether that is still there. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question, but I think I can respond mainly on the railway side and not so much on the port side. I'm sure my colleagues here can add into that. In terms of integration for the continent, SADC and all of that, yes, Transnet is part of that strategy. But one of the challenges that we tend to face is the gauge that is involved in terms of basically how wide the rail system is. It has to be consistent so that a train that comes from, let's say, Cameroon all the way down, you mustn't keep on changing along the way. So that is issue number one, which is at a technical level and which can be quite costly. But not to say you cannot move around it, because if you move to the, let's say, the border system, to say, I will use an example, let's say you have a train that now has to transverse into a corridor, a rail that is narrower, which is the case in our side. You can always then change the locomotives that are involved in terms of hauling that load that is involved. So it's not that it's not doable. There can be some immediate or medium-term solutions to solve that problem, so that at least we start the fluidity of the movement whilst we solve the more technical side, to say when you start the train with a locomotive in DRC and so on, it moves all the way without really stopping and so on. So from a rail perspective, that is one area that we need to crack in terms of the gauge or the width of the track. There is also the issue of one of the issues or challenges that we face in the country is issues of crime in terms of cable theft and so on and so forth. So there also there's some technologies that we need to move into in terms of reducing the amount of copper that is involved in the overhead equipment. And there's some technologies that are involved there in terms of changing those wires and so on that are involved, and reducing it from being copper-based to being other alloys and so on. So that's another area that we are looking at in terms of improving or putting technology in front and being ahead to reduce some of the challenges, rather than to just keep on having security guards and all over the shore. But I think from the port perspective itself, I will allow maybe my colleagues from the ports to also add something.
Shamila, okay, we'll allow you. Continue, Conrad.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not from TMPA, but yeah, no, I think what we've learned at Freeport Saldanha in terms of port modernization is over the past 2 years, we've been working on a study. It was just concluded with TNPA called Integrated Port Infrastructure. And so in terms of modernization, I already spoke to some of the emerging sectors that ports need to design their facilities for. But another thing that is becoming very clear to us is that as we go and design port infrastructure, we need to make sure that we design turnkey solutions and that we design common user facilities. So where more than one user can facilitate or use that facility, because one, it unlocks, it de-risks first movers, and it also unlocks economies of scale. And what we find often in terms of projects is that common user facilities is the determining factor between ambition and bankability. And so this is one of the things that we are landing through the study with our partners, TNPA, is to say, let's look at what are the facilities that we can develop that can serve multiple users, and then crowd in also private sector investment in that way as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for those responses to the questions and to those who have posed them. Shamila, maybe if I'm just looking at our time, and of course that we're on the gun with that now, if I can ask you to give our just your final comment related to skills, but also just our closing remark for this benefit of this purpose, and for this panel rather. And I think for the benefits of the panel, can I just ask you that if we had a silver bullet, as it were, the key priority as we leave SIDSSA this year related to infrastructure, but the ports specifically, and answering some of the big critical questions around how we get logistics rights in the region, not just our country, but in the region. What do you think business's biggest ask right now from the stakeholders, the policy writers, those who run the frameworks, and those who ultimately assist us in enabling and delivering these services, who are here and listening? What can we collectively come together on and say, if we did this one thing together, the rest of the system may just move a little bit closer between the 1%, the 3%, the 5%, the jobs that we need, and all the different spaces of inequality that we have picked on today?
Do you have any easier question than that, Lynette?
I never run an easy question.
No. So, I mean, I think I don't have to say that there isn't one silver bullet. Certainly from a business perspective, the policy certainly, but beyond that, I think the vision clarity is very important. Because if we're clear about where we want to go, double-clicking on what that means in terms of strategy, in terms of policy reform, becomes a lot easier. And so what we want to enable and the vision behind that, I think, needs to be clear. And after that, the policy certainty, so that the long-term commitments in improving the ports and infrastructure can follow. I've mentioned earlier on the reform process, so credible reform implementation. I think to see that action is being taken, we're tracking that, there's accountability, helps to go a long way in terms of building confidence and further investment. And then, of course, we need resilient, efficient, and reliably maintained infrastructure. So when you have that reliability, and it's boring as it sounds, that really is what is going to attract investment and to bring the activity onto those different types of transportation and the logistic corridors that we are going to need. So not a silver bullet, but I think those coming together will do that. We already know what the knock-on opportunities are.
Yeah, we know what the opportunity is. We know what the challenge is, but we've got to find this middle ground that helps us track the gap.
And the vision that I'm talking about is not just obviously for South Africa. I mean, if we're talking about the movement of goods across the region, then those things do need to be clarified. And it can't be easy, because we would have done it by now if it was, right? This is not something new to us. Creating regional hubs that talk about this is decades old. But I think we're at a different inflection point, though, right now.
Yes.
And this is our huge opportunity as a continent. And that free movement of goods and actualizing, particularly the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, is in our hands now. And these are huge enablers. Can I make the final point on skills?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So just on skills, to give a very quick example, and I couldn't concur more with Jose on that, it was just that we really, from a business perspective, I'm going to give an example. Yesterday, we signed an MOU with Infrastructure South Africa as the NBI. There's our head of TAMDEV standing at the back there, trying to be inconspicuous with her gorgeous gray hair. But is one of the key opportunities for skills development slightly differently is to actually dig into what you already have. And so the TAMDEV model is one that looks at retirees in the country, many of whom have deep skills and knowledge in private sector and public sector, across logistics, across finance, across project management, that can immediately help support a younger generation and to embed knowledge transfer in a very different way. And I think we need to dig deep into using the skills that we already have. The TAMDEV project has done that for a number of years and has been instrumental in supporting capacitation of the state in that regard. And so that is and that's an agreement that we signed as an MOU yesterday with Infrastructure South Africa, who we have partnered with before. So it's another way of thinking of skills. The other one is to be very clear, I think, about where these transitions in various forms, we always talk about the just transition and the energy transition, but we're talking about transitions across various parts of our economies, including infrastructure and logistics, which of course do have an energy element underpinning them. If we come together and we understand that that is happening already, and therefore the skills needs are current, we have and can, for example, the NBI brought together under Just Transition and Skilling for Employment Initiative, 30 different CEOs from various sectors in the economy We've come together to say we know the transition is happening. We don't want to be in a position where we have to import skills unnecessarily. But if we don't do something now about tackling our education system that unfortunately is not ahead of the curve in anticipating demand, can we move to demand-led skilling? And there are pockets within private sector that can do that, but we absolutely have to partner with the public sector because we cannot leave the higher education and training system behind. And so that is what we're doing. And of course, you know, the old African proverb, which has probably been overused, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so private sector is good at moving fast. There's no doubt about that. But I think initiatives like our Just Skilling for Employment show us that it is possible to go together if you're very deliberate about making sure that you can bring public sector along, and work with them and actually be led by them for the good of the economy and the development of our young people in particular, but that also you're not in the immediate losing the opportunity for development that often private sector is leading. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shamila, for that point. I see there's another popping point at the end, but just a very quick last word.
A quick one. If you think about integration,
yes.
I think that we have to also to think about legislation, because you have French, you have Portuguese, you have English, and each country, according to the previous power, has their own specific regulations. So I think that we have to go quickly on this, to harmonize. That's my suggestion.
Okay, so the policy harmonization as well related to getting to work. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please give my panel a warm round of applause. Thank you to each of you for the insights, and a very big thank you as well to our opening speakers, the executive mayors of Douala as well as Nelson Mandela Bay, for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the conference does continue. To those of you who intended to attend the final sessions as well, they're about to kick off in Hall D and across at the Century City Urban Square for those final sessions. And then, of course, if you do need further information, the information desk in the exhibition area downstairs is open. Please keep your accreditation on you. You do need it to enter and exit all of the different venues related to the conference, both today, tonight, if you're attending any side events, as well as tomorrow morning's main plenary. It's been a pleasure being your moderator for these panels. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you as the work continues. Thank you.